Hi, Vatsala.
Hi, Gita.
Welcome to this conversation. Thank you for agreeing, actually.
Thank you for hosting me.
Pleasure. So, Vatsala, this conversation, I think, is unique because I'm trying to frame it within the context of feminism and feminist science studies and some of the questions that we've been raising there. And like all other feminism, the two important questions are around both gendering of institutions and the patriarchy around them or within them. So the questions are generally coming from there. Yeah. So one of the first things that we notice is that there is still a very strong understanding that science and scientific institutions, the scientific community are largely value neutral, that they are objective, that they are, only consider only merit and things like that. And yet, on the ground, what we see is that there are only some kind of people who get to do science.
Right.
They come from certain communities, certain genders, certain class backgrounds, certain caste backgrounds. In that context, we also see women are much less represented.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
In science. How do you see this?
So it's definitely true that even though science is gender neutral and scientific institutions are gender neutral, the participation of women is a small percentage of the entire scientific enterprise. And, lots of thought has gone into this. Multiple people have weighed in on this. There's lots and lots of research papers on what can be done to improve the participation of women in science. But one thing is that, the perception of science as a career and the perception of a scientist is sort of ingrained in old school thought. Even now, when you say scientist, the picture that comes into most people's mind is Albert Einstein with crazy hair, right? Not Marie Curie, right? And so there's an expectation that a scientist is supposed to be geeky, is supposed to be a little bit crazy, and all of that is supposed to be in his own world, right? And some of it is also societal expectation that a woman cannot be in her own world because she always has responsibilities. Absolutely. Right? So these are, I think, apart from operational difficulties, we talk about, the biological clock, how science training takes a long time, many years. All of that is operational difficulties, and perhaps we can fix that with interventional policies, which many places are doing, and it's working. But I think societal perceptions of what a scientist is should also change. Right. And maybe it'll change slowly in the coming years.
Yeah. And also, I feel that somewhere this idea that, science is innately available to men and not available to women, that women don't have the innate ability, say for mathematics, for instance. There have been many controversies in the recent years on women's ability, and very often the answer given to low representation of women in science is their ability. I think that's quite a misconception.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the first experiment in human race was probably agriculture, right? And there's books written on how the first farmers were actually women, right? That's an experiment. That's probably one of the first experiments where
to work with soil, water,
and to see what makes this grow better and what can I do to adjust the conditions. That's a perfect experiment. And without agriculture, where would we be today?
As a civilization.
As a civilization. So it's easy to ascribe anything and everything to innate ability. And the more, as a neuroscientist even, I can say that we have very poor understanding of what is innate ability. Is there even an innate ability? Because the brain is a very plastic structure. And what you do in terms of practice will change the brain and make you more capable in whatever you're doing. And of course, what happens in early life, how you nurture a child, what kind of expectations you build for the child to have a dream, to be able to chase the dream, to have the confidence. All of that is a factor that goes into what the child becomes later. So it's hugely a fallacy to ascribe things to innate abilities without evidence.
Yeah, thank you for that. The other thing that we notice is that all disciplines in the academia, in the social sciences, for example, economics is seen to be a place for men, and it is seen as a discipline which is far more exact because it's more mathematical and things like that. Sociology is seen as feminized because we deal with subjectivities. Similarly, in the sciences also, we see that in physics becomes much more a masculinized discipline, the way we look at it. And therefore, you find such few men, women in physics, as opposed to, say, in biology, which is seen as a feminized field. Do you see that? Have you?
So this again, if you were living in the 19th century, for example, biology would also have been seen as a masculine subject.
Is it?
Absolutely. I mean, there were so few women biologists back then that, as we talked about earlier, the involvement of women in science as a whole was very, very minuscule, correct? And even when they were involved, they were probably helping their husbands in the lab and not really taking credit for what they were doing, correct? So today, biology is seen as a feminine subject, but it was not so in the previous centuries because they were not there. And who is to say that in the coming centuries, there will be more, there could be more women physicists, women mathematicians, and then it would be seen less as a masculine subject, right?
Yeah. No, it's not just about whether women are there or not, but it's also a question of how the discipline is seen. Because it's probably affinity to nature, probably affinity to life, and women's affinity to these things. There is a certain association with biology as a discipline, as being more feminized.
Well, I don't have a clear-cut answer for that. But one thing I could say is biology is very, very observation-oriented, whereas something like mathematics is more abstract.
Exactly.
And so what goes into biology is different from what goes into mathematics. It could also be about confidence, right? You make a theory. How do you know that what you're thinking about, what your abstract concept is correct? I see a big chasm in terms of levels of confidence between boys and girls, between men and women, and also from personal experience. And I don't know if that's cultural or biological or developmental,
or sociological.
Or sociological, right? Any of those things could sculpt the way women perceive themselves. And if you're not sure of yourself, then you're less likely to go into something that's very abstract than into something that's observational and you can check, right? I observed this and I found this, and somebody else can observe it and verify whether that is correct. So I feel more sure-footed in what I do. I don't know if this is true. This is
that's interesting.
That's a viewpoint. That's all.
Yeah, that it it inspires more confidence amongst women to be able to. Wonderful, thanks. And now I'd like to take you back into your own personal history. And what was it like growing up as a girl child? And where did you grow up?
So I had a very happy childhood. I grew up in Chennai. My parents were both working for the state government, and now they are retired. I am the last child in a family of 4.
I see.
One boy and then 3 girls. The environment that I grew up in was a very protective and egalitarian home atmosphere, but a very patriarchal and discriminatory one, a little bit outside of the family. So my parents are hugely supportive, and they said that, education is our biggest strength.
Yeah.
So all four of you, regardless of gender, boy or girl, doesn't matter. You study what you want to study, what you're interested in, not with the intention of making money or, from a professional point of view, but if you're interested in something, you should follow it. You should study as much as you want. And that was because neither one of them got a chance to go to college. So
Your parents?
Yeah, my parents.
Okay.
Both of them had to drop off after high school because their family situations did not allow them to get into college.
I see. Okay.
Financially, they were not able to support college education.
I see. Okay.
And my mom faced a lot of discrimination as a girl child.
I see.
Even to finish college.
And she spoke to you about this?
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, and I've told my daughter about this because this is something that people should know, right?
Yeah.
From where we've progressed to where.
Yeah.
So my mom, when she finished her 8th grade, she was told that she had to drop out of school. And she fasted for 3 days.
Really?
To be allowed to finish SSLC, the school final.
Amazing.
And even then, my grandfather said, it's enough if girls know how to write letters to their husband. You don't need to
I hope he meant love letters. Sorry.
And this was the same grandfather who spent a lot of money for private tuitions for my uncles. So there was a lot of discrimination there. But my mom is not one to take no for an answer. So she went on a fast, and finally my grandfather relented and he said, your uncle's thread ceremony is coming up. If somebody gives you money or gives the function, like gift money, you can collect that gift money and pay it as school fees.
I see.
And one of her aunts, who was a guest at the wedding, forgot to give the gift money. And they were about to leave, and they got in the horse cart, and they were riding to the railway station. And this picture is like etched in my mind, even though I'm not there, right? The way my mom described it. And she ran after the horse cart
and said, give the
you
money.
forgot to give the money. Give me the money. And that's how she finished school.
So where was this?
This was in Chengalpet, which is adjacent to
And
Chennai.
this must have been what, 40s, 50s?
This was 50s probably.
50s, yeah. Okay. Very, very interesting. Yeah.
So then, so that's my parents. So they've lived through that, and they decided that, we're not going to deny education for our children.
Okay. Yes.
But the extended family is not, as progressive as my parents. And constantly they had to face questions on, why you're doing this.
I see.
You have to marry off your daughters. You better save for the wedding. You can't be spending on education.
I see.
And that kind of criticism came our way too. Like whatever we did was never good enough, right? Because we were girls.
Right.
And to this day, to this day, yeah.
Yeah. To this day it continues.
Yes.
So how was it in school? As a girl, a child, with somebody who wanted to pursue science, how was it at school?
I had a very good school. My teachers were very good teachers. Not really, they were good teachers in the sense that they were inspirational, not in the sense of, training kids to mug up and get marks. But several of my teachers, both science teachers as well as non-science teachers, were interested in creating an excitement for the subject with the students. I still remember my Tamil teacher used to bring in these palm leaf inscriptions to show us this is how it was written in the olden days. My chemistry teacher would bring in demonstrations to class. They would take us on field trips. We went to the Tamil Nadu.
This was in Chennai?
This was in Chennai, yes.
Which school was this?
This is called NSN Matriculation Higher Secondary School. It's in Krompet in Chennai.
It's a state school?
It is a matriculation school. So I did matriculation until 10th. And then 11th, 12th was Tamil Nadu State Board. Yeah.
And it had very good teachers.
Very good teachers.
Did you feel at all that in the science classroom, some of the research is showing that there is a subtle gender discrimination that teachers, carry within that women, girls' abilities, boys. So though the girls might be extremely good, they don't get encouraged enough in the science classroom. All classrooms, but particularly science.
Sorry. No, actually, I don't have experiences
I didn't
feel that. Yes, there was a certain, especially among the women teachers than the men teachers.
Okay.
I had a very good physics teacher, a male teacher, and a very good biology teacher. And both of them were very, very encouraging of me and other kids, regardless of gender. Also female teachers, chemistry, biology teachers, math teachers. There may have been discrimination based on physical ability, not really mental ability,
for sports and things.
Sports and things, or, having to protect girls if you're going out on a field trip, that sort of thing, but not really in the classroom in learning.
Also not in the laboratory.
Also not in the laboratory. Yeah.
Because that's more or less at school level, it's standard work.
Right.
Yeah. So from there, walk us through the professional career.
So I
did
finished
your PhD.
Right. So after school, I went to Anna University, which is also in Chennai.
Yes.
So I was in Chennai all throughout until I went to the US for PhD. And this was an interesting transition because I knew I wanted to study biology.
You already knew?
I already knew.
Okay.
I'm in love with biology. I want to study biology. I want to become a biological researcher. And this, of course, I had the freedom to do it because I faced no pressure from my family, right? And also being the last child means that you don't have to think about financially supporting or
the family,
which may have been the case for the more elder siblings, right? As the youngest one, I had none of those trappings. I could dream. I could do what I wanted.
Okay.
So I finished 12th. I wanted to do biology, but I didn't like the traditional BSc botany, zoology, which was the kind that was available back then. Maybe now the field has, expanded a lot more. You find lots more interesting majors, but back then it was all botany, zoology. But all I got into was engineering in Coimbatore.
Okay, I see.
And, this is like a standard rite of passage that kids do. They finish their 12th and they write medical and engineering entrance exams.
Right.
I got into a very good engineering college in Coimbatore. I attended one day of class. I was terribly homesick because I had been closeted at home all my life.
All your life, yeah.
Here I was sitting in Coimbatore, away from my family, and
doing engineering.
In a classroom where I'm not enjoying what they're teaching me,
yeah.
right? Like bolts
your heart is with biology.
Exactly. So I decided that I won't have any of it. I came back home with no prospects, right? I had no plan. I just came back home. Now to think about it, it's kind of foolish, but I don't know how I made that decision. I said, I'm not doing this. I just came back home. And by luck, that same day, I got a card from Anna University for the B.Tech Biotech program.
I see. Okay.
And I had given the entrance exam for this. It was a national level entrance exam.
I see.
And there were only 3 general categories seats.
Okay.
And they said that I was waiting list number 4 for the only seat available. The other 2 seats had been filled, and there was 1 seat available, and I was waiting list number 4. So anyway, I was very thrilled that I got this card for biotech, which is, sounds very cool and much more modern.
Yeah.
So I went there, and I was sitting there, fingers crossed, hoping that, I'm waiting list number 4. Exactly. And by luck, I got into it. And I did 4 years of B.Tech Biotech. It was also very nourishing. And
at Anna University?
At Anna University. Okay. And finished the 4-year program, and then went to the US for Ph.D. in Neuroscience to Brandeis.
Brandeis. So how was it at Brandeis? As a woman of color, as a young research scholar, how was it? There are people, report that It's very liberating, very good, or it can be very debilitating if there is racism. How was your experience?
Yeah, so sometimes, ignorance is a blessing, right? I was not aware of any of the politics of science when I went to Brandeis. And so, I was in the Boston area, which is like the mecca of higher education. And my Ph.D. mentor was a very, very sweet, but very, very powerful woman neuroscientist.
I see. Okay, so you were mentored by a woman.
Yes, I mean, throughout, both for my postdoc, for my graduate school as well as postdoc, I had both were women mentors, very powerful, very well known.
White women.
White women, but also very sweet, very not very aggressive, or, and both very accomplished mentors who had a diverse range of trainees. Yeah. So when I got to Brandeis, I had no idea that discrimination was even a reality, right? My lab was geographically very diverse. There was me, there was a Jamaican, there were white Americans, there was a Hispanic person from Chile, there was an Iranian and an Israeli, both working together and both very close friends. So it was very, very mixed. And of course, people of Chinese origin. So it was actually not a given that any one group is the dominant group in science.
I see.
Very, very mixed environment. And it was fun, to get to know.
Would you say this is specifically maybe possible in a laboratory in neuroscience, or is it you saw it around in Brandeis?
It was like that. Everywhere. Diverse. Very diverse. I don't know if that is the case now, but at that time, the policies of the government were also very liberal, and operationally it was very easy in terms of getting visas, getting fellowships, getting financial support. There were institutional grants without which I could not have gone. As I told you, I come from a middle class family, so I could only go there because I got full tuition waiver and full stipend for supporting my living expenses. And this was possible because there was a grant that the neuroscience program had from the government that made it possible.
So this kind of diversity helped you both as a human being person and as a scientist, you'd say, the kind of science?
Absolutely.
And we don't see that kind of diversity, for example, in our Indian institutions. We don't see people from different caste, different religious, different, sexuality groups as much, I'd say. Would you agree?
It's true.
Bit we are lacking on
absolutely
diversity.
And even linguistic diversity. You have
regional diversity.
Right. You have groups from certain groups, linguistic groups, which are more dominant in science compared to others, right? Like you would easily run into a Bengali
or a Tamilian.
And
these are also upper caste, Bengalis or Tamilians.
Right. And I would say not just upper caste, I would say probably it's privilege, right? It might be dominated by upper caste, but at the same time, the reason is privilege. And privilege can come in many forms, right? It's privilege because science is a long journey. And not, like I said, if I had had familial financial pressures to finish college and then find a job to support my family, I wouldn't be here, right? So it takes a certain kind of financial security to be in science. So that's one factor. If I had had my parents who insisted on me getting married because of orthodoxy or being conservative or a very strong sense of caste, right? This is a big fear for parents of girls in this country, that if they let the girl out of their control, so to speak, especially the higher education that they get, the chances of getting married outside of the caste increases, right? And so that's a fear that
is very strong.
Very strong, very strong. More so for girls than for boys.
Yeah.
So this again goes back to your question about gender imbalance in science. But coming back to the question of Indian laboratories, it is still better, I would say, than certain other places like, let's say, labs in China, for example. Because our country is by definition very heterogeneous. So the samples that we draw are coming from different strata in society. Yeah, middle class and above, not below that, because below that it's not possible for them to spend so much time in education. But even in that, there is a very large range of incomes from which we draw our students, and that makes a difference. Lately, we are getting students from not only Bengal and Tamil Nadu and Kerala, but also other far out places, Northeast, for example. There are a lot of students from Jammu Kashmir who are interested in coming and pursuing research. So I have hope that things are changing.
And if we become more and more conscious of our practices, I think we can ensure regional, linguistic, gender, and caste diversity.
Absolutely.
I mean, if we can start being reflexive about it.
Correct. And the other thing is also that for a person to get into this research domain, they need to get high quality education in the school. And the primary school and the secondary school education in this country need to be strengthened in the rural areas.
Also.
If we don't do that, then we're not going to get into that segment at all. Because they're not going to be aware that such careers even exist. And to be able to get there, you need good teachers, good school systems, not only in urban areas, in metro cities, but also in the rural, tier 3, tier 4 kind of places. So that you can't fix it at the college and the postgraduate level. You have to fix it in the primary school level.
And do you think that the scientific community can play a role in trying to fix this?
Absolutely. We should definitely do outreach to these places. Even if you're not able to go in person, everybody has a cell phone now. Try to do at least online, right? Scientists have a lot on their plate. That is true.
Is it?
Because, in most places, a lot of the administration does fall on scientists' hands. And we teach, and we write grants, and we publish papers, and we train students.
Yeah, I can see that there's so little time to do other things.
So, I try to do outreach to college students whenever possible. I try to. So, I've done one talk in Tamil. I would like to do more. So that is something.
I think basically the gap between, very esoteric research institutions and university level colleges and school level, that gap has to be sort of filled.
So institutionally, we are trying to address that. We are trying to put together a program for students from more disadvantaged backgrounds, school students who can come in here and spend some time and get to know what scientific research is all about.
Are they targeted things also for girls?
They're not targeted for girls. It's both for boys and girls because, come to think of it.
At the school level, you see a
wide... there's both boys and girls from that type of background, living in a village or living in a small town, not having access to information or to facilities. It doesn't matter if you're a boy or a girl, you're going to be disadvantaged regardless.
So, Vatsala, as a professional biologist, you are obviously considered to be very successful post, of course, things like the Bhatnagar Award and things like that. And what, according to you, so there is a whole lot of role model literature that we make for girls, saying, see, this one is there, this one achieved it. But our problem in feminist science studies has also been to make realistic role models. Oftentimes we make role models which are very sweep under the carpet the kind of real challenges that women face.
Mm-hmm.
There is gender discrimination.
Yeah.
But when we are talking about making role models, we tend to make these very sweet heroine kind of narratives. No?
Superheroes.
Superheroes.
Right.
So you want to talk a little bit about the challenges that you faced?
Yeah. So, first of all, as I said, I had to fight a lot of the internal demons, right? For whatever reason, at every stage in my career, I've had a lot of self-doubt.
How we internalize this, no?
I think, I'm at a comfortable spot now, but I wouldn't say that I'm...
The journey was all...
Yeah.
What were these self-doubts?
Whether I'm good enough, right? In fact, when I joined NCBS, I felt like an imposter. I confessed to my Ph.D. advisor. I said, I feel like I don't belong. I feel like they made a mistake hiring me. And she said, imposter syndrome. I said, what? And she said, I felt the same thing.
A lot of women report this.
And she said, when I was hired to Brandeis, I would look over my shoulders all the time thinking, I'm a fraud and they're going to find out that I'm a fraud anytime soon.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know why we have these internal demons, right? But they are there. And the internal demons are much worse than what you can get from outside, because any small criticism that comes from the outside can have a greater damage, because already inside you're crumbling, right? And so a criticism from the outside and you're like, oh, maybe they're right? And you have to fight it. You have to, because if you don't fight it, you can't survive, right? On the one hand, there are your dreams, what you wanted to do your whole life, right? And you worked so hard for it. And I wanted to be a scientist. I wanted to be an independent scientist and run my own research program. I wanted to study the brain. And here I am given a position at one of the premier institutes in the country and given money, right?
To do that.
To do that. And how can I undo all of this by myself, right? So there's no choice but to push forward, right? Because if you don't push forward, you're wasting all of the opportunity that has been given to you. And that's a bigger crime.
Yeah. No, so I think what you're pointing out towards is very interesting, that how we internalize patriarchy, misogyny. We think it's our problem.
Correct.
Actually, it isn't our problem.
It isn't our problem.
Yeah, even though sometimes you might think that the external environment is very, very supportive, but the point is that you're also very conscious of the fact that it can go far more easily from us women, that external support.
Right.
And so you're always anxious about that.
And so what I did in the next phase was, okay, I will show them, right? So working for validation. I will show them that, I'm good. I will show them that I'm worthy of this. And it took even more personal growth to cross that phase and then to come to a point to say that I'm good. I'm doing this for my satisfaction and I'm going to do a good job because I derive happiness out of this.
Was there an element of people-pleasing that you had to do to seek that validation?
Yeah. I mean, not in terms of flattering them or anything, but I almost was a maniac to do everything to not leave any stone unturned, right? Like whatever was given to me, I wanted to do it at the best, right? Like,
did that have a toll on your personal life?
On my health, yes. I had an autoimmune disease, then it went away. But there was a lot of stress, that I used to have palpitations. Luckily, I have a supporting home atmosphere. So, my personal relationships did not suffer. But I think my health really took a toll.
Of course.
Yeah.
You know, the other thing that we hear often, which is connected to what we are talking about just now, is that women, successful women in science, often become very toxic. They become more toxic than the men in decision-making powers or as principal investigators. They become more aggressive, they become more competitive, they become more demanding. And my question is that, yes, they do, because they have to doubly fight the system, you know. And the onus of not being that person doesn't lie on them. It is also on the system. What is your experience of this idea of the toxic woman?
This word toxic is thrown around a lot.
Yeah.
And I think
when men show that kind of behavior,
it's leadership.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there is double standards for it, definitely. But also, you know, toxic is used loosely in many cases, right? For example, you give an honest feedback, right? You're labeled abrasive. You're labeled as someone who's very arrogant, right? Some of it is also that the system chooses for certain qualities. For example, my own life history, as I told you, I've always gone against the grain, right? I told you that the extended family constantly filled our ears with girls. You know, girls are supposed to get married at a certain age, and you know,
and to people from your own caste community, etc.
Etc. Right? Arranged marriage. You're not supposed to choose your own husband. You have to get married to someone that your parent chooses for you, and before you turn 25 or whatever, have kids, and that's what you do with your life. So to steer away from that and to build a life of my choice was itself, you know, asserting myself, right? So if you look in academia, if you look in scientific research, you will find a lot of people like that. You know, people who are first gen, I should say. Because if you're not first gen, you probably don't have to fight it as much as some of us, you know, who are first gen, who don't have the path laid out to us in front of us, right? And I would say first gen people of both genders, you know, first gen, because they would have fought their way to get where they are. And when you're used to, you know, clearing the woods and making your own path, you are likely to be a fighter.
Okay.
You won't take things that people say at face value. You would be someone who will want to be assured of what the right path is, right? You would be someone who's argumentative. You would be someone who would want to be convinced and not sign off on things just because someone said that this was the thing to be done. And these are seen as difficult qualities.
In women.
Especially among women. Yes. Because the society, as you said, is patriarchal. They're not used to seeing women in...
And there is a other side to it, no? That, I mean, if you're a woman, then you're expected to be soft and kind and compassionate and mothering and things like that. That is also a problem for us in professional spaces, because it reproduces certain social stereotypes which we've been fighting in the family to some extent. And you're expected to do the same thing here. When you are mentoring in your laboratory, your research students, particularly girls and women, how do you navigate this thing with them? Should they be aggressive and competitive and put their, you know, foot down, or should they be softer and whatever?
I don't give advice on how they deliver things, as long as, because it's a personal style. You know, you can't really train a person to speak differently than what is their natural urge. And what I do is help them talk clearly, present their ideas clearly, whatever way they want. And in my lab, you know, we have a culture of when we ask questions, we ask questions in a neutral tone. Neither, saying this is all correct and, it's a great and all that, nor saying, what if you're wrong kind of questions. But you can ask questions in a neutral tone where you're genuinely curious about something, which makes everybody think about the data and not really whether the data are correct or wrong, or whether the person
who's asking the question.
Exactly.
Try to, because oftentimes it's not the data but who's asking which gets questioned.
Exactly. And one of the things that I have observed again is that the men in my lab are much more comfortable asking questions than the women. So it takes it's not that they don't ask, but
they probably have a similar syndrome like yours.
Exactly. So I let them mature at their own pace. The women in their early years of PhD will be very, very silent. And as they mature, they become good participants in the discussion. By the time they're ready to graduate, they're so wonderfully well-rounded, and they can think about other people's projects in a fantastic manner. But the men, can feel much more confident even in their early years to ask questions. These are, things that we have to.
There's also, this might seem like a superficial question, but about the presentation of the self that academic women have to go through, but women in science particularly, some of them say that, if they dress in a particular way, they are not taken seriously, that, there's a particular expectation, implicitly, might not be explicitly, about, how women should talk, how women should dress, how women should walk. How do you look at it? Is it there, this kind of...
I don't know if that's the case in, for example, the humanities, or perhaps in engineering, computer science, physics, and so on. In biology, not so much. I've seen women wear saris, women wear skirts, trousers. It's not
colorful
really
things.
Colorful things like I'm wearing today, right?
That there's no threat that you will be taken less seriously if you're fancily dressed.
No, I don't think so. No, at least that's not been my experience.
That's not been your experience.
Right.
The other thing, Vatsala, is this whole question of sexual harassment, which I think is a topic that we don't talk about. And it exists in scientific institutions. We all know that.
Right.
But we don't talk about it.
It exists pervasively everywhere. And it was kind of brushed under the carpet because the number of women in the workforce was very less. And therefore, they didn't have the agency to be able to complain about it. But now, with increasing participation of women, we are hearing about this a lot more, right? But it exists everywhere, but it's more problematic in academia for a couple of reasons. One is this absolute mentor-mentee relationship, right? Where you're supposed to be at a superior power level, right? And you're supposed to take care of the person who's in your tutelage. Now, if you harass that person, it's not easy for them to rebuild their career elsewhere, especially if they have invested some time in your lab, right? And the second thing is this network, right? Where a person at a superior power level has a network that's accessible to them, with which they can destroy the career of this person anywhere they go. So this, whereas in like if you take an IT company, for example, if somebody is harassing a woman in company A, that woman can easily resign tomorrow and go to another place and restart her career, right? She can lodge a complaint in company A and say, I'm going to another place. I don't want to deal with this anymore, right? what do you do when it's in a lab situation where a person is in a PhD program?
Of course.
And they've invested a lot of training time. How do they deal with this?
And it's because they have no rights over that work.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not so easy to quit and go from one place to another.
Yeah.
And it's not just at the student level. If you take even faculty level, right? The research landscape in India is still very nascent. There are not too many places, and news gets out fast. If there is a case in one institute, everybody in the country will know it.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And people will start gossiping in the corridors. You know, how do you get on with your normal life?
Yeah.
Without having to face all of this? And my suspicion is because of this, a lot of the complaints don't even surface.
They don't even surface.
Because you're worried that this is going to be a stigma on your name for a long time, right?
And this is in such enlightened intellectual spaces like us.
You know, you take the US, there have been such ugly cases in the past, recent past, from very famous scientists. And even in those cases, it's not clear that the people involved have been able to pick up the pieces and move on.
Yeah.
So if that is the case in a country with, you know, billions of dollars poured into research, where would we be?
Yeah. So how do we find a way out of this?
I think
the ICs are there, but they don't seem to be functioning in most higher education institutions, right? And I feel that in kind of premier research institutes, so they are almost have negligible impact.
Yeah. So this is a situation in which I've always said that prevention is better than cure. You know, we'll have to work to minimize. We can't, you know, abolish it completely, because human beings being human beings. But we can work to minimize. We can reduce the kind of toxic attitudes that people bring with them by saying it doesn't matter what toxic attitudes you have with you when you've grown up with certain notions. But here, these are the notions that we are going to work with. You please leave all of your, you know, other ideas outside, right? And we make that clear with gender sensitization.
But I don't see any programs on gender sensitization.
We have actually. NCBS has. And TFR is working to implement it across the centers. Because there is a lot of male chauvinism.
Yeah, and also sometimes women themselves don't know.
Right.
You know, that to call out something that this is abusive, this is not abusive, and women themselves don't know how to tackle the situation. So a lot of training, a lot of awareness, capability building has to be done before, you know, they can take on any of these positions. Yeah. That's quite a tall order, but let's hope somewhere a collectivization of women in science will help this, you know, the organizations and associations
and a zero
of women
tolerance
across institutions.
Right.
You know, if some of these can be done. Yeah.
And there has to be zero tolerance policy towards all of this.
Yeah, and implementation.
Yeah.
Not just, I find that most of the time, even if there is a case that surfaces, the perpetrator is rehabilitated before.
And this is true in the US as well.
Yeah. No, it's a globe everywhere.
Yeah.
So also you spoke about, family. And, we often say that there are so few women in science because they have family responsibility, and those who make it into science have family support. So what is this relationship that we have with family? Because in men's cases, it's often taken for granted that the support will be there. Nobody talks about it. You know. But we are always very aware of having to talk about family support.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. It takes a village.
To make a woman in science.
Absolutely. See, because we ourselves are so driven, right?
Yeah.
Most of us also get married to people we are attracted to who are also very driven and,
Yeah.
they have a purpose in life. And, and so it's not possible to ask, or it's not reasonable to ask them to leave all of that and sit at home.
Right.
Whereas for men, for whatever reason, that is not a criterion by which they're attracted to women. Right? Most men don't see that as a necessary criterion. That
they should have a drive.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And so, as in other professions, even here in academia, many men, I shouldn't say all, but many men are married to stay-at-home spouses. And so the daily life becomes that much more easier, right? You don't need to worry about who's going to pick up the child today. I'm having to travel, who's going to take care of household chores when I'm not there, right? For me and my husband, we're constantly having to have this dialogue of, okay, what dates are you traveling? What dates am I traveling? So, and if both of us are traveling, what are we going to do about the child? So we can't just pick up bag and leave. I mean, I know male friends for whom their wives actually pack their suitcases and keep it ready at home. we know how they all become geniuses, or how they all get their fancy awards and everything. No. It's true that, I mean, I guess you're right. You need a village to build anybody. But I think in some cases, the village is taken for granted. And in other cases like ours, you have to keep underlining. That, in this situation, India is actually better because, the grandparents are typically very involved. My parents, of course, when I came to NCBS, I had a 3-month-old baby. So my parents were with
chipped
me
in,
and not just chipped in. I mean, they were there to take care of it. I was living the idyllic scientist life at that time, building my lab and, recruiting students and all that. And they took care of the baby. So not everybody is as lucky. Then it's quite a privilege. It is. Because you can't just leave an infant with a babysitter. It's not.
You don't want to do that.
You don't want to do that. And when the child is with their grandparent, you rest assured in the feeling that the child is going to be bonding with the grandparent, and it's going to be beautiful. It's a win-win on both situations, both sides.
Or of course, if you have a very good creche, if you don't have this.
But the creche only takes after 6 months, not before.
Before. Oh, you're talking about when she was 3 months old.
Yeah.
So, tell us a little bit about your work.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm interested in how animals move from one place to another. So, this is a question that I became interested in even as a PhD student.
Okay.
I started my work in lobsters.
Okay.
And then when I was finishing my PhD, by that time I was sure that I wanted to come back to India. And so I was looking for a good model organism with which, because in neuroscience, you need a model organism.
Okay.
You need something that you can put in a dish, you can insert electrodes or image or somehow figure out what the neurons are doing. And then correlate that to what the behavior of the animal would be. Right. So working with humans in that case is not a possibility.
Right.
So lobsters became a problem because lobsters are very expensive in India. And you don't get the same North Atlantic, the clawed lobster species here. So, and I also am very interested in development. For example, in humans, a baby when it's born is pretty helpless. Over the course of a year, they slowly have this trajectory over which they are slowly learning different kinds of movements.
Yes.
And then being able to stand up and make a few steps, fall down, and then being able to run. All of that develops, and the question is, how is this made possible? Right? And so zebrafish became a very good answer to this for this kind of group of questions. How do animals move, and how do the networks for movement develop? Because one, it's easily available. It's actually endemic to India. It was first
zebrafish.
A researcher caught zebrafish from West Bengal, took it to Oregon, and then worked on it for over 10 years to establish it as a model organism in genetics and development.
Okay.
And then afterwards in the 1990s, it became useful also as a model organism for neuroscience.
I see.
Because the main advantage was that the early larval stages are transparent.
Okay.
So you can see through the animal into the brain and into the spinal cord, and you can look at the activity of these neurons while the animal is still alive, and you're not doing any damage to it. You're not doing surgery on it.
Right.
It's a whole organism. It's just doing its own thing. And you can see what the neurons are doing. So that became a very, very powerful model in which you can ask these kinds of questions.
Without having to
do surgery.
Right. Cut the wire.
Yeah, and the other advantage, of course, is, people could make transgenic animals, make genetically engineered fish expressing all of interesting things, fluorescent proteins and things like that. You could make mutants, you could model human diseases, because it's also a vertebrate, so there is a lot of commonality between humans and zebrafish. Unlike lobster, lobster is an invertebrate.
So working with the zebrafish helps extrapolate? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So I started doing postdoc in a lab, which was actually studying tadpoles, not zebrafish.
Okay.
And but I was the lone zebrafish warrior there, and that sort of helped because I was kind of independent doing this work.
This was in Brandeis?
This was in Cold Spring Harbor. This was the Post-Doctoral Fellowship after Ph.D. And of course, then it helped me set up the fish here as a model organism because I was the first one to do it here.
Achha.
And still the only one.
So working with zebrafish.
So what we do is we can poke electrodes into the brain of the animal, and we can monitor the kind of movements that the animal is doing, and look at what the nervous system is telling the rest of the body, and make correlations and say, okay, if the brain is commanding like this, the body is moving like this. So what is the relationship, right? We can drive the neurons in different ways and say how is the movement changing. We can make these larvae can also learn movement patterns. So we can make them learn new things and see how is the brain acquiring this new learning. So all of these are possibilities.
Vatsala, one of the things that is coming to my mind right now is that as feminist science studies scholars, we've sort of been looking at the whole question of what will a feminist biology look like and identifying bias, but also suggesting alternative ways of doing research. So, for example, in your work, would you say a simple question like, do we study the female species, the brain of the female species, or do we not study it? Do we sort of just normalize whatever happens to the male of the species to the whole species?
No, absolutely not. There are fundamental differences in the structure of the brain between males and females. The larvae that we study are not yet gendered. They've not been sexually differentiated
as yet.
Achha. Okay. But people that study rodents, for example, now the standard practice is to have mixed genders unless your study calls for a gendered approach. You have to have males and females, not just females or not just males. But having said that, there are questions which entail an approach into looking at the male brain or the female brain. For example, effects of stress. How does stress affect the male brain versus the female brain? Does it affect it differently? There are some studies which suggest that it does. Or for example, the effect of hormones, various kinds of hormones, fluctuations in hormones, how do they affect the brain? These are still questions that are out there.
Which are not, to to do what we were talking in the beginning, to look for innate abilities.
No, not at all. We are very, very far away from getting anywhere near innate ability. Like I said, the brain is plastic. The brain changes throughout life. So my brain today is not the same as my brain was when I was an adult, but let's say 5 years ago. My brain today is not the same as it is going to be 5 years from now. And we're not even talking about processes of aging or neurodegeneration.
Just context.
Just context. Just steady state is not steady state where the brain is concerned, right? So what is innate is poorly defined or not at all defined, because innate, as I said, could stem from genetic differences, developmental differences, nutritional differences. You know, there are a lot of kids who are malnourished, and studies show that it affects their brain development, right?
Of course.
So, and we know that nutritional availability to girls in this country is less compared to nutritional availability to boy children, right? So you can't ignore all of this. Just look at a fMRI scan of a male brain versus a female brain and say this is innate.
Or correlate it with something like genetics or this or how much.
Right.
There are other things to correlate it with.
Now, as a scientist, you know, I would like to keep an open mind, right? And say that, you know, I don't want to assume that the male brain and the female brain are exactly the same, given everything else. If you keep all other factors equal, is a male brain equal to female brain? Probably not, right? Because, you know, there are biological differences which you can't erase. And they do have an effect on how the brain grows and matures. There are certain structures in the male brain that are different from certain structures in the female brain. But does that translate into tangible differences in ability to carry out certain functions? Right? I don't think we can answer
that conclusive.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's, I guess, important to note. No, methodologically, it's very important to understand how to interpret difference.
Correct.
No, it could be across races, it could be across species, it could be across genders. So I think, that's important to understand as a scientific method.
Right.
Okay, now a wide-based question. A lot of us in sociology, for example, have been worried and pointed out to the role of science in making what we call very large-scale risks. You know, whether it is with the making of the bomb, whether it is with eugenics, whether it is with what we do with the environment. There's a certain kind of science which is much more preferred. A science of control, a science of overpowering of nature and all of that. And we need to imagine and envision a different kind of science. If I were to ask you how you would envision it as a scientist, what would you say? Like, where are we going wrong, let's say, in the way we envision science and the role of science in the larger context?
You're asking, you know, are you asking what would we do differently than what is being done?
Whether firstly you agree that yes, science has played a huge role in the kind of mess we are in.
Absolutely.
And we're in a big mess everywhere, aren't we?
Yes, absolutely. And so, I mean, I have a philosophy. I think there's too much hubris in science. We go and meddle with things without actually knowing how to get out of it. For example, you know, like all of the environmental, ecological messes we have created everywhere. You know, gain of function research, right? Creation of atom bomb, for example, just because we can, right? And now talk of, you know, like editing the human genome, designer babies, and this is all nice to hear in a science fiction, but ethically, should we go there just because we can?
Just because
right?
we can.
So there are a number of things we can do today, or even AI for that matter, right? I'm watching the whole AI revolution with a little bit of trepidation. It's become a problem even for us to screen applications because we don't know whether the application was written by a human or by a bot. And what is this going to do? It's going to destroy training for students because, when I sit and try to write something, I'm struggling for a word. I'm sitting and struggling, right? And that's a learning process. I write a draft, I scratch it out, I edit it, I write it again. What can I do today? I can say, I don't have time for this. I can just feed in some garbage into ChatGPT and say, here is a draft. What does that do? It saves me time today, but it has deprived me of the training that I could do in terms of writing drafts.
Yeah, I think the question is, of course, more complex. I mean, right now I prefer to use Microsoft Word or whatever we use to edit our documents. And I don't write anymore. Maybe that's.
I mean, typing it in. Yeah. I mean, I do mean typing it into Microsoft Word.
Yeah.
But you go through drafts, right?
Yeah. No. Also, I think we lose skills as we adapt. We gain new skills, but the question of ethics is much more complex.
Right.
I mean, it's not just about the kind of skills that we are dropping and the kind of skills that we are gaining.
Yeah.
The question of ethics is eventually, what are we going to do with this?
Right.
Where are we going in terms of how far away from our humanity are we going?
We've gone past the line of no return. That is my feeling. Because anything and everything that we discover or invent is a double-edged knife. It can be used for good purpose. It can be used for very evil purposes. And of course, people are going to use it both ways. For example, deep fake videos being used to convey fake news. Fake news is causing probably more harm to society. You can easily incite a riot.
Yeah. So the whole idea of objectivity is actually going out of the window.
Yeah. And the same thing in my own field now. We have something called organoids and assembloids, which means that you can take early stage human embryonic stem cells, differentiate them into neurons, and make a ball of nerve cells. And if you grow it long enough, you can actually see certain features of the human brain in that organoid. Now, if I were to fine-tune this process, make it better and better and better, I can probably grow a whole human brain in a dish. Is that ethical?
Yeah.
Right? What is that human brain in a dish doing? What is it thinking? Does it have consciousness?
Yeah.
Is it suffering?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, I don't know if anybody will have time to think about these aspects before rushing to do them.
Yeah, I think our systems need to bring that consciousness in, in the way we teach our science, in the way we practice our science. I hardly any ethical questions get really asked or resolved.
Right.
Anyway, that's a very pessimistic tone. But suppose if I were to ask you, which is what I've been asking everyone, that if you are given the opportunity to sort of just freely pursue your science, without any responsibilities of ethics or family or this or that, social responsibility, would you be happy doing that?
No.
No?
No, not at all. I think, I think of it as a very, monochromatic way of living. I like having the different facets of my life.
Yeah.
I think, so, as a biologist, when you look at the complexity of the human body, right? Not just the brain, but the whole human body, it's a thing of beauty, right? And every moment I think to myself that, this life that has been given to us, it's so precious, right? It's so precious that no one thing really justifies doing it for the entire life. You've got I'm not saying this right, but what I feel is that you've got this one life to live, right? And this one life you should try and absorb and experience everything there is to experience.
And what we do is science to the exclusion of everything else. It does become a problem at some point.
Absolutely.
For most human beings. So I think that model needs to be rethought about the scientist who does science to the exclusion of everything.
Oh, that's not healthy at all. That's not healthy at all.
I think as women we know that we live far more integrated and holistic lives.
Right.
Thank you, Vatsala.
Thank you, Gita.
So
I really
much.
enjoyed
It was
this
a lovely
conversation.
Yes. And let's hope that a lot of young women see this conversation and get inspired in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you.